Hi, I'm Ann, and I'm with Nurtured Noggins, and I am so glad that you are watching this video, and I just want you to know that Nurtured Noggins is committed to helping you see and appreciate and understand your child and yourself through a developmental lens. That's what we're all about, is just really helping people understand their children. And so I come to you as a person who has lots of experience in working with kids and parents and teaching child development and raising my own kids. But you are the expert on your child, and you're the one who knows the most about them because you spend 24/7 with them. And so anything that I say or anybody else says, weigh it against your own best judgment because you are the one who knows your child the best. So each week I like to come prepared to talk about something, and I want to invite you to ask questions in the comments if anything comes up as I am talking, and I'll try to watch those comments. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about is, are you a rule follower when it comes to your baby? You know, there are people who follow the rules real readily, and then there's people who have a little bit more freedom with rules, and they're not quite as inclined to always follow the rules. I personally am a rule follower. I will follow the letter of the law almost all the time. My husband, on the other hand, he will question every rule and wonder, do we really need to do that? And so we look at things differently. Every single person in this world has their own approach and their own point of view on things. That includes your child as well, which is really one of the neat things that we get to discover about our children as they grow. But I'm a rule follower, and one thing that I am faced with almost every day, at the end of my day, at the end of the workday, I like to go to an exercise class that's held at a park that's about 1.5 miles from our house. And one thing that I love to do is I have a little Yamaha Vino scooter. It's a 125. It doesn't go very fast, but it's just a little scooter, and I like to tootle around town. We live in kind of a smaller town right outside a big city, and I can drive the streets here really easily because our speed limits are very low. So I like to ride my scooter to the class, and a lot of times, probably, 70% of the time, at the red light at the end of our, halfway to the park, I catch it red. And the sensor on the red light does not sense me on my little motorcycle sitting there. It's looking for a big vehicle instead of a little motorcycle. And so sometimes I'll go through what feels like so many cycles of lights before it will ever turn green for me. And usually it won't turn green for me unless a car comes up behind me or a car comes up on the other side of the street. So every day I'm faced with this question: am I going to break the law and run this red light, or am I going to wait for someone to come and trigger the light for me? And it's just kind of this silly conversation I have with myself because I don't want to get a ticket. It costs $100 or more to pay for a ticket like that. And so anyways, that story just illustrates the fact that I'm a rule follower. When I was raising our children, I would follow my pediatrician's advice, to the T. I always followed the rules. But when you're a parent, there are spoken rules and there are unspoken rules about the right and wrong ways to do things. And so I just wanted to take a look at some of those. First, let's look at where do these unspoken rules and spoken rules come from for you as the parent. Okay, so we'll talk about parents first. And one of the places we get these unspoken rules, or sometimes they're very spoken as well, is through family expectations. The way that our parents and our aunts and uncles and our, everybody's parents and everybody's extended family, the way that they raise their kids or the way that they were raised as a kid seems to be the way that they think that it should be done. And so oftentimes the way other people are thinking that they need to tell you how to do things with your baby may be very different from what you want to do. And so you have sort of this little bit of an inner conflict about the right and wrong way to do things because you don't want to displease or maybe even question somebody, but at the same time, you know what you think is best for your own child. And so some places that might come into play would be like things like how do you respond to your child when they cry, who's in charge of the baby, you know, like who's the one who gets to decide all the little things about how your baby's going to be raised. I remember my mom told me that whenever I was a baby, I cried a lot. I had colic, she believed. And so I was the fourth of 5 kids. There were 3 older siblings in the house, and then me, this baby who would cry and cry and cry and cry without stopping. And so the people in her family, her extended family, said, just put the baby in the crib and leave her be. She's not going to stop crying. Nothing you're doing is helping. And my mom told me that she knew that because nothing helped, that when she tried to comfort me and I didn't stop crying, that meant that I really was hurting and that I needed to be held. And so that's just an example of 2 different approaches to how you would respond to a child who's crying. And so this is something that new parents need to figure out on their own, how they're going to manage those kinds of things. Another place we have rules that are unspoken and sometimes very spoken as well is in the expectations that we have with our partners of who's going to do what, kind of the division of labor, because when you bring a baby home from the hospital, all of a sudden there's a lot more jobs to do in the house. And so how you approach those things, like the responsibilities of who's doing what, and also how you're going to approach routine caregiving with your baby, how you're going to do bedtime and meals and those kinds of things. That's another place where we sometimes have rules that dictate the way that we think it should be. Another place is social expectations. You know, there's a lot of public opinion out there about how things go between you and your child. And unfortunately, people will oftentimes tell you their opinions, and you don't need to hear their opinions. But sometimes it's kind of an unspoken thing as well. People give you glances or looks or whatever when you're out and about with your child, and it's just something that you have to figure out how to deal with as a parent. I remember one time we had taken our oldest child to a restaurant. We were out to eat, and she was, just a little, I don't know, maybe 1.5, 2 years old. She wasn't speaking yet. But she was a screamer. She would scream really, really loud, like piercingly loud. And we're just sitting in the restaurant. It's very, noisy hum. People are eating and talking. It's a loud place. And she let out one of her screams, and literally the whole place got silent, and everybody looked at us, and we looked up and saw that everybody was looking at us, and I just, kind of shrugged my shoulders. I said, it's a happy scream. I mean, she's happy. She's not unhappy, but she was able to evoke a lot of response from all of these strangers in the restaurant. And so oftentimes we feel pressure as a parent. When something like that happens, we might feel all different kinds of feelings. And so just those are some other places where you might find some spoken and unspoken rules about how you parent and how you approach things as a parent. Babies in the movie, babies at the theater, crying babies, wherever you are, a lot of times that just makes people uncomfortable, and you might feel some silent stuff from people as that happens when you're out and about. So what about your baby? There's a lot of rules for babies. There's a lot of just things that we know that we're supposed to do when we have a baby, as we care for our baby. And so I think it's really important that we understand the difference between a recommendation and a rule. And a recommendation means that if you don't do it, it's not life and death, it's not that big a deal. And so figuring out the difference between what's recommended for your child and what's required for your child is part of figuring out how to be a parent and how to make your decisions about how you're going to, navigate this thing. Some rules are hard and fast, and these are the ones that can't be broken. Things like car seats. You have to put your baby in a car seat. I'm old enough to remember that people used to drive around with babies in their laps. It's crazy to think of now, but car seats and other safety issues like that are non-negotiables, of course. But there are some recommendations that you get to decide as a parent how you're going to do that. What do you want to do? And so these are things to think about before you have your baby, but then you also have lots and lots of time once your baby comes to figure these things out as you go along, and also to change your mind as you go along, because it's going to be different, you know, from 1 month to the next. Sometimes from 1 week to the next, you may change your mind. From one child to the next, for sure, because kids are always different. But a couple of places where we might feel there's a lot of rules, or there's lots of conversation. One is with pacifiers, and pacifiers, you know, are very common, and most people use pacifiers now. But there's a group of folks who you know, think that we shouldn't use pacifiers. And so I'm just going to kind of give you some pros and cons on the recommendation of pacifiers, and then it just gives you some food for thought. So first of all, let me say that our kids all use pacifiers. Well, we offered them, but only 2 of the 3 took to it. One of them didn't like the passing. But pacifiers are great because they soothe your baby when they cry. You know, it's very soothing to suck on a pacifier, and so it satisfies this need to suck. A baby is born with a sucking reflex, which means that they need, and they will, you know, automatically suck on things. We even see little babies in the ultrasound pictures sucking on their fingers or making the sucking motions with their mouth. And so this need continues, as you know, as in the first couple of years of life, they'll continue to just suck on things. And so pacifiers satisfy that need to suck. And they also will help a baby get to sleep, because babies like to suck themselves to sleep. They're easy and they're simple. They're readily available. You can get passies most any grocery store, drugstore, gas station, fast food, wherever. You can usually find pacifiers for sale. And the truth is, babies are going to suck on something. If I give them a pacifier, they'll find something to suck on. Oftentimes, it's their finger or their thumb. And so, if you offer a passy, then you actually are giving them, giving them something to satisfy this need, but also it's something that you can kind of control whether or not they continue with it, because you are able to take it away. Just as an aside, my doctor always said that if you want a child to give up a pacifier or give up a bottle or anything that they've kind of become attached to in the first year of life, that needs to happen by 14 months. And so that was a rule or I guess a recommendation that I sometimes followed, and then I think with one kid, I did not follow that, and I kind of regretted it because it was true. And I also kind of observed it with my friends' children, that if you want to break a habit like that, like pacifiers or bottles or something like that, if you can break it by 14 months, there's just something that happens developmentally that makes it a little bit easier then. It makes it harder past that time. Some cons for pacifiers. One is, and I know that you know this if you have a newborn baby, but it's recommended that you not offer a passy in the first couple of weeks if you're breastfeeding. And the reason is that when babies suck on a pacifier, they're using a certain way with their tongue and the roof of their mouth and the way they are forming their mouth. It's a different suck than they would use for breastfeeding. And so if you've got, you're trying to get them, situated in this breastfeeding relationship, and then you're offering this thing that has a totally different feel and suck to it or mechanism to it, it can get confusing for a little one. And so they recommend that you establish your nursing patterns and your nursing rhythm before offering a passy. But if your baby's crying and you want to offer them a passy, it's not going to hurt. It's probably not going to be something that's, you can't figure out. But it can interfere with that. It does stifle a cry, and there's a whole group of people out there who believe that pacifiers are not that great for babies because we use them just to stuff them in their mouth and get them to stop crying when they're crying to communicate something. And so if we have this, stop crying attitude, then we aren't taking the time to figure out why they're crying. And so that's kind of the thinking behind that idea of not giving a kid a passy to make them stop crying. Another con with passies is they get lost. And so if you've got a kid who is very attached and needs that passy to get to sleep and you can't find any of them, usually happens once they start walking around with them in their mouth and sticking them somewhere or dropping them somewhere. It can be kind of miserable, and so you've got to figure out how you can get one pretty quick. If a child is dependent on a pacifier to get to sleep at night, and then they wake up in the middle of the night and they can't find their passy, then it's going to wake them up, which is going to wake you up, and then it just makes for broken sleep during the night. And so that's one, con of the pacifier for bedtime is that particular thing. We managed at our house to get through that all right, but I know that there are some folks who feel pretty strongly about that, using that crutch for sleep. There can be an overdependence on that passy as the child gets older, well past that 14-month mark, and it can become a bit of a struggle. It also can be a little bit of a hindrance with language development because it's kind of hard to speak when you've got this big thing in your mouth. And so we've all been around children who talk through their pacifier and they're hard to understand, and it all gets figured out. If a kid keeps a passy too long, it's not a big deal, but it does get a little bit in the way when they're learning how to talk. Let's see. But the bottom line is with pacifiers, there's no 6th graders out there with a pacifier in their mouth. Kids give them up eventually. They grow out of it, and it's not that big of a deal. And so it's one of those recommendations that can go either way. It really doesn't matter. Another one is solid foods, and there's lots of opinions and rules to follow around solid foods and when you would offer them to your baby. When you introduce them to your child is really between you and your doctor. Your doctor will tell you what they recommend based on your baby, their weight, their development, what their needs are. And so you can, get lots of information from lots of different people, but really rely on your pediatrician to tell you. Probably what they'll tell you is between 4 to 6 months of age, you would offer their first solid foods. This is about when kids get to the place weight-wise where they are needing a little bit more calories, and they might need more satiation between feedings to just stretch them out and get them through the night longer, especially. Some places where we might have some recommendations and rules to follow that you have some leniency with. One is how you feed your baby. There's several different ways to feed a baby solid foods. First of all is in a bottle. A lot of times people will put a little cereal in a bottle to thicken it up and get the baby to have those extra calories in that way. There's also, the containers that allow you to suck the baby food out with a nipple. I used to be an infant teacher, so I got to try all these different things, even the ones that I didn't try as a parent. I've tried them all because of this experience of working with other people's children and doing what they asked. But what I noticed when you give a kid one of those little containers that has the nipple and you put the food in it and they suck it out, man, they can suck that food out in 1 minute or less. I mean, they can take a bunch of food really, really fast with those things, especially if they're hungry. And so I didn't feel like they were really gaining the experience of enjoying their food. They were getting it and getting full, but they really were not, playing with it like the babies who were spoon-fed were. And so, of course, that's the third way to feed your baby is with a spoon. And again, the mechanism of sucking is different from the mechanism of taking food with a spoon. And so that's why it's always so fun to watch a brand new baby, a brand new eater, I should say, take in the food because they don't have it down. And it takes about a week or so for them to understand how to use their tongue to get that swallowing, to swallow the food and get it down instead of it coming back out their mouth. It does take a little longer than a week maybe, but initially, those first days are the trickiest for that. if you give your baby the solids in a bottle or in one of the, like the packs or the squeeze packs that they have now at the store, it's no big deal. It works great. It's very, very convenient. And I know that lots and lots of people use them. I would definitely use them. But you are, with a new eater, you are delaying just a little bit learning that process of eating with a spoon and doing that with I'm talking like a 4, 5, 6-month-old baby, not a 12-month-old or something. Another thing that there's, a lot of options are the types of food that you give your kid. And of course there's commercial baby food, which we're all familiar with and probably all have used. There's homemade baby food that you can make yourself, and then there's just straight from your plate food. And so the way that you choose to feed your baby in that way also is really a recommendation. And whatever works for you and your family and your child is going to be just fine. Children all over the world eat differently, they eat different foods, and they all manage to grow up and be good. And so, how the kinds of food that you feed your child, just make it what you think is right. I think it is really interesting, though, that babies will let us know what they like and what they don't like really easily. And I can remember one little girl that was in my class, and we had 8 babies. There were 2 of us that cared for them, plus some student help, because I always worked in college child development programs where we were caring for student families, and then also students would come in and we would work with them. But there was one little girl, and she would just, anytime you gave her a bite of any meat, whether it was baby food meat or, grown-up food meat that's made into baby food, whatever meat it was, she would spit it out. She did not like meat. And this wasn't just a week. This was months and months of her spitting out meat. She was truly a vegetarian from birth. And so that was a really interesting thing for me to observe and see, that these types of preferences come out in the first couple of years of life. Who we are as a person is set, and it just unfolds. And that's the beauty of parenthood, is you get to watch your child unfold and see what they're like. So that's all I'm going to say on some of those decisions. But I think you get the idea that there are rules that are, recommendations, and then there are rules that are rules. And knowing what those rules are and following the way to do things right for your child is part of learning to be a parent and part of the responsibility of parenthood. That responsibility can feel very heavy when you come home from the hospital with your new baby. It's almost like you're bringing home a suitcase full of bricks. It's just the weight of that responsibility can be very heavy on a new parent, and it takes a little time to get used to carrying that responsibility around. But it doesn't get lighter. The responsibility never goes away, but it does get easier to manage, and you grow into it. You get stronger as time goes on, and it all works out just fine. So that is about it. As I conclude, I just want to say that I have, if you are expecting a baby or if you have a brand new baby, we've got a freebie for you. It's on how to give a newborn baby a bath. I'm going to put a link in the comments. And we do have a course coming up that is for parents, and it's all about looking at navigating the first couple of years of parenting and how to approach it as a person, how to really understand yourself as a parent, because I think that's really so important. The way that we respond to our child is very much a reflection of our own understanding of ourselves. And so that's what it's going to be all about, and I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you. So if you have any questions, just message me. This live is going to be every week, and I'm open to taking your questions, and I would love to talk about your child with you, because I love to talk about kids. Okay, so that is it for today, and I will talk with you soon. Bye-bye.